Hello everyone, this is Aaron Johnson with the Johnson iRacing team. Today I've opened up a test session for the Legends 34 Ford Coupe at USA International. I thought what I'd do is walk you through the adjustments that you can make in the garage and what those adjustments do to the way your car handles. So to do that, I'm going to click on the garage button and I'm going to come in here where I've got three different pages. One page that deals with tires, one that shows the chassis adjustments, and then one where you can make some notes. A little shout out to Old School Racing. I downloaded one of their setups to get started at USA International, and since then I've adjusted it to fit my driving style. Let's start with the tires page. Basically, the only thing you can change with respect to tires is the tire pressures and the stagger. Okay. So before we start, let's talk about how a race car works. We can think of a race car as being an X. The left front and right rear form one leg of the X, the right front and left rear form the other. These two tires work together, so changes that I make here are similar, right? If I increase the tire pressure in the right front, that's going to tighten the car up. If I increase the tire pressure in the left rear, that's also going to tighten the car up, right? So these two work together. Same with the left front and the right rear. Adjustments are fairly simple, right? In the left front, if we go up in pressure, we're going to loosen the car. If we go down in pressure, we're going to tighten it. In the right front, if we go up in pressure, it's exactly the opposite. We're going to tighten the car. If we drop the tire pressure, we're going to loosen the car up. Left rear is just like the right front. We raise the pressure in the left rear, the car is going to tighten up. We drop the pressure in the left rear, that's going to loosen the car up. And then the right rear behaves like the left front. We raise the tire pressure, that loosens the car up. Drop the tire pressure, that's going to tighten the car up. Okay, so tires are fairly simple. You go up in pressure on the right rear, left front, the car gets looser. You go up in pressure on the right front or left rear, the car gets tighter. If you decrease the pressures, they behave in the opposite direction. The stagger is the difference in circumference of one tire compared to its opposite tire on the opposite side of the car. So if an inch of stagger in the front means the right front tire is 1 inch larger in circumference than the left front tire. An inch of stagger in the rear means the right rear tire is 1 inch larger in circumference than the left rear. I've got the staggers set equally here. My car has been pretty good. It's just a touch loose on exit, so I kind of have to be careful from the center out early in a run, but it tightens up. But if I were to change the stagger, I can change the handling characteristics. So if I make the front stagger slightly smaller than the rear stagger, that loosens the car up. Right? So the car will be just a little bit looser if I change the front stagger so that it's a little smaller. If I make the rear stagger a little smaller than the front stagger, the car is going to be a little tighter. If I decrease both staggers, but decrease them equally, that's really going to change how well the car turns in the middle of the corner. At least that's been my experience with iRacing. So if I drop those staggers, what I find is that in the center of the corner, that changes the way the car turns. More stagger makes the car freer through the middle of the corner. Less stagger makes it a little tighter through the middle of the corner. Okay, so tires are pretty straightforward. Now let's take a look at the chassis and let's talk about what all these things are. Toe-in is the degree to which the front tires point toward or away from each other. If toe-in is 0, the front tires are perfectly parallel. If toe-in is negative, the front tires are pointed slightly away from each other. Imagine taking your feet and then turning your toes outward so that your toes point away from each other. If the toe-in is positive, the car is pigeon-toed. The tires point toward each other. Okay. Steering offset is just the degree to which your center on your steering wheel is offset from the center of the car. Brake bias is how much of the braking is done by the front wheels relative to the rear wheels. Front wheel offset has to do with how much your right side wheels are offset from the center line of the wheel and the hub. We tend to keep that at 5/8 on an asphalt oval track. Okay, so now let's talk about the other things. Corner weight is if we put the car on a scale and we had a scale under each wheel, how much weight would each scale register, right? So the car weighs a total, let's do the math, 353 and 335 is 688, and 333 is 988, 1018 to 1021, and then 304 is 1,325 pounds, okay? Of that 1,325 pounds, 353 pounds is on the left front wheel, or on the left front tire, 333 on the left rear, 335 on the right front, and 304 on the right rear. Ride height, that's a measurement of how far the frame of the car is off the ground. It's measured at a specific point, and depending on where you're racing, what class you're racing, that may be measured slightly differently. per class. Shock collar offset basically adjusts the height at which the spring is installed in the chassis. This is another way, I think, of saying weight jack from the way I understand racing back in the day. What this really does is it raises or lowers the ride height by changing the position of the spring. Spring rate, that's how strong your spring is. Higher the spring rate, the more weight it takes to compress that spring an inch. Okay, so the left front here is at 350, the left front corner is at 353, so my spring should be compressed about an inch. Camber has to do with the angle your tire makes vertically. So if you were to look at the tire straight on from in front of the car, this is whether or not the car is tilted in at the top or in at the bottom, whether or not that tire is tilted in or out. Negative camber means that the top of the tire is tilted on the right side, is tilted toward the engine. Okay. Positive camber means the top of the tire is tilted away from the center of the car or away from the engine. That's how I always remembered it. So on the right side, you tend to have the top of the tire tilted in toward the engine, because when you turn left, that tends to straighten up a little bit or stand up a little bit. On the left side, you tend to have the camber so that the top of the tire is tilted away from the center of the car, again for the same reason. Caster we make if we look at the tire from the side of the car, so that what we can see is the hub in the center, and we draw a line between the two ball joints that connect that spindle and the hub, and caster tells us if that's positive, the top of the ball joint is back toward the rear of the car, or negative, the top of the ball joint is toward the front of the car. And this affects the way the car, how easily the car turns into a corner. Okay. Corner height, ride height, or corner weight, ride height, shock collar offset are the same in the rear. So let's talk about what these adjustments do. If we change the toe in, we change the way really that the car gets into the corner. A positive toe in actually will help you get turned into the corner a little bit. And it'll make the car a little more stable when you're going down the straightaway, but it also tends to build up more heat, and it tends to wear your right front tire a little more in my experience. A negative toe in or slight toe out condition gives you a little better temperature buildup. What I find is that if you're just a little loose on entry, if you toe the car out a little, it'll make your loose on entry condition a little bit better. We're not going to worry about steering offset. Front brake bias. The more front brake you have, the more the car pushes going in under braking. So if you're using a lot of brake going into the corner and you're finding the car is pushing really hard, you could drop the brake bias a little bit, because if you make the brake bias more toward the rear, so you drop this number, what you'll find is the car loosens up on entry under braking. Now once you get off the brake, maybe all bets are off, but it does change the way the car handles on entry. Let's talk about spring rate. So remember when we talked about the tires, we said that the left front and the right rear work together, and the right front and left rear work together. Well, that's the same when it comes to spring rate and shock collar offset as well. Okay, and here's the rule of thumb. If I go up in spring rate on the right front or the left rear, I'm going to tighten the car up. Okay, so if I raise the right front spring rate to 250, that's going to tighten the car up. If I raise the right rear or the left rear spring rate to 225, that's going to tighten the car up. If I decrease the spring rate on the right front, that'll loosen the car. Decrease the spring rate on the left rear, it's going to loosen the car up. The left front and right rear are exactly the opposite. If I increase the spring rate, if I increase the spring rate on the right rear, I'm going to loosen the car up. Same with the left front. If I increase the spring rate in the left front, I'm going to loosen the car up. If I decrease the spring rate in the right rear, I'll tighten the car. And the same with the left front. If we drop the spring rate, we're going to tighten the car up. Now, in practicality, once I have the front spring rates set to something I'm comfortable with, I don't change them. When I make changes, I almost always make them with the rear springs. And rather than looking at absolute numbers, I tend to look at the difference in spring rate. The more positive this number is, the bigger the difference in the right rear and left rear spring, the looser the car is going to be. And the smaller this number is, the tighter the car is going to be. Okay. Now you can flip these around. You don't have to have it so that the left rear is higher than the right rear. You can run them reversed like that if you want. What I just did there is going to tighten the car up a ton. So if I was fighting a really loose car, I might very well have made that change to try to really tighten the car up. Camber. On short oval tracks, I tend to run as much positive camber in the left front as I can and as much negative camber in the right front as I can. Now, I know there's some guys out there that really think that what you want is to have the tires have equal pressures across the front. And what that means is if you're looking at your tires here and say the outside of the right front tire is 120, the middle's 140, and the inside's 160, then that might mean that you want to change the camber because it means that the outside of the tire is not touching the ground. And in some classes that's probably true, but I find in the Legends class that just doesn't really help very much. In fact, what helps more is having more camber, more negative camber in the right front, more positive in the left front, because it tends to help the car turn in. I don't know why it does. I have never run a Legends car in real life, but with iRacing, it seems to me that maxing out the camber really helps you turn into a corner. So if you've got a track that's got fairly tight corners, USA International's corners are fairly tight, you're going to want a lot of camber. If you decrease that number and say this goes to, let's make it 5.0, and we drop this to negative 4.8, it's going to change how well the car turns into the corner. Okay. But I tend to try to keep these as positive as I can on the left and as negative as I can on the right. You'll notice my caster is positive for both left front and right front, and this is really about split. All right, the greater the split is between these two, the better your car is going to turn into the corner. So if I were to drop this down to, say, 2.2, now I'd have a split of 3.7. That means my car would turn into the corner a lot better. The problem is if I drop that enough, that means the car is going to be pulling hard to the left on the straightaway, and that scrubs off straightaway speed. So it's a balance between having a car that doesn't scrub off straightaway speed and having a car that turns into the corner pretty well. Okay, those are the basic adjustments. Okay, there's nothing too spectacular about that. Changing spring rate, going up on the left front and right rear loosens the car up. Going up on the left rear or right front tightens the car up. Let's talk about shock collar offset. So shock collar basically is weight jack, and it works just like the spring settings do. Okay, so if I drop the shock collar offset, that basically means that I'm pushing down on the spring. Okay, so if I drop the shock collar offset here, I'm going to, in the left front, tighten the car up. Same with the right rear. If I drop that shock collar offset, it tightens the car up. If I raise that number, it loosens the car up. Right front and left rear are exactly the opposite. If I drop this number, we're going to loosen the car. If I raise this number, we're going to tighten the car. Now that seems like a lot to remember, right? All these different adjustments and all the different changes they make. Tires are easy. With tires, you go up in pressure on that corner. If it's the right front or left rear, it tightens the car. If you go up on the left front or right rear, it loosens the car. That's easy, but chassis, it seems to be really confusing. But there's a pretty good rule of thumb in here that you can follow, and that's to look at this number. That's the cross weight, okay? The cross weight's a really good indicator of whether or not your car is going to get tighter or looser. If you make a change that increases the cross weight, that's the amount of weight on the left rear and the right front, if this number goes up when you make a change, it's going to tighten the car up. Okay, so by going up on the shock collar, I just tightened the car. Sorry, by going down on the shock collar, I just tightened the car up. Okay, so any change that I make, if I change the spring rate, it's going to change the number. Here the number went up, going down on the right rear, tightened up the car. We go back up on the right rear, we're going to loosen the car. So if this cross weight number, this number right here, if that number goes up when you make a change, your car is going to be tighter. If that number goes down when you make a change, your car is going to be looser, right? So that's a really easy way to kind of follow. So you may know that changing this number is going to drop the left front, it's going to loosen the car up, but you may also just want to see what happens. And you can make changes at the same time. So when you get really close, and you got a car that's really close to perfect, and you're wanting to change the cross weight, say from 50.4 to 50.5. Well, if I drop that, it goes by 0.4. If I raise it, it goes up by 0.3 50.3, almost to 50.7 or 50.8. Well, maybe we'll try the left front. If I drop that, it goes to 50.7. I'm wanting to only go to 50.5 or 50.3. I'm just wanting to change a little bit. And there's no single adjustment that I can make here that's going to allow me to make that change. So I have to start thinking about making changes at the same time. So let's say I want to go to 50.4. That drops me to 50.1, but if I make this one with it, stays 50.4. Well, let's try that again. Maybe drop 2. Now we're to 50.5. So we made a 0.1% change by going 2 clicks on the right front and the right rear. Let's go back to where we were. And let's see what happens if we drop each on this side. Now we're down to 50.3, right? So what we couldn't accomplish with a single adjustment, we were able to go to 50.3 by making what I think of as a paired adjustment. That's one other adjustment that you might be able to make when you start to get really close to having a car that handles the way you want it to. A couple of other things. Fuel fill. Basically, this allows you to determine how much fuel you put in a car, but notice that it also changes what the corner weights are. Okay, when we add fuel to a car, we add 7.5 pounds for every gallon, and that changes the way your car is going to handle. Last but not least, your rear gear ratio. There are a lot of guys that do a lot of adjustment with rear gears, and they'll run, say, a 250 in third. What the rear gear ratio tells you is how many revolutions of the drive shaft are necessary to turn the wheels 1 revolution. So the higher this number is, the more revolutions it takes to turn the wheels 1. So the higher the number, the lower the gear, right? So this number needs to be higher for really short tracks. You're going to run a fairly low gear. Number needs to be smaller for long tracks like USA International. You're going to run a high gear. Now, I know a lot of guys that decide they want to run in third, they want to run in fourth, rather than running in high. But I'll tell you this, when you can run in high gear, you should. And the reason you should is that when you're running in first or second or third, there are multiple gears in the transmission that are being turned to make the transmission use its internal gear ratio in addition to the rear end ratio that you're using to get your final drive. And every time you turn an extra gear, you use up horsepower. So if you can run in high, that's what you want to do. You want to run in high. If you can't, then you make some adjustments. The best thing here, you want to be hitting your rev limiter just as you let off the fuel. You want, when you let off the throttle, you want to be hitting the rev limiter in this class. This class runs a motorcycle engine with a rev limiter, and if you're hitting the rev limiter just as you let off the gas, you're maxing out, or maybe even just you're letting off just before you hit the rev limiter, you're really maxing out the horsepower that you can use. Okay. So once you've got a setup that you're comfortable with, you can go into My Setups. I'm going to go ahead and save this. This is mod 1. I'm going to call it mod VD. Sorry, VID. VD sounds a little weird. And that's just one that I modified for the video. And once you've done that, save it. And if you go out, race on the track, if you find you're a little loose, adjust one thing, right? So you're a little bit loose, and you don't think you're loose enough to change a spring. Maybe you're going to change the shock collar and try to put just a little more cross weight in it. So make that change. Go out, run a few laps. I like to try to run at least 10 before I come back in. A lot of times you can tell immediately what change has been made, but you can't tell until the tires get really good and warm how that change is going to affect the long-term handling of the car. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back to where I like it. I'm going to hit apply, and once that's done, then each time you go out, if the car gets a little better, you might make a note. You might keep a piece of scrap paper at your desk. If the car gets a little worse, make that note as well. One last thing that I think everybody should know, it's possible to share a setup, and you can pick whoever you might want to share it with. So this may be one you can put in a folder for everyone. You might share it with a club that you're a part of, or you might share it with your racing team. If you're in a practice, you can pick out anyone. Once you go to share, the list of everyone that's in the practice will show up. You could pick a specific person to share a setup with, or you could share it with everyone in the practice or everyone in the race. That's about it for today. Again, about a 20-minute video. It seems like I can't get these to be much shorter than that. I hope you've learned something. I hope that you're able to go out and race on the asphalt oval and go fast and turn left. For the Johnson iRacing team, this is Aaron Johnson on the Johnson iRacing Network.